What if I told you that you could eradicate your cancer and still not be healed? Or that true healing might happen even while you're still living with disease? Welcome to the 100th episode of Born to Heal. When I started this podcast in 2021, we had just 80 downloads. Today, we reach over 8,000 people each month. I relaunched it last year with a tiny team and no clear roadmap. Just a deep trust in the process. Thank you for walking this path with me. For this special episode, I wanted to share the lesson that's reshaped everything I once believed. After 20 years as a radiation oncologist and countless hours at patients' bedsides, I've come to understand that healing isn't just about getting rid of illness. It's something much deeper. Today, I'll explore the two essential elements of true healing that go beyond the physical and why chasing a cure might actually keep you from the peace you're really looking for. I'll also share the story of Patsy, a woman whose fearless authenticity showed me what real serenity looks like. If this podcast has moved you in any way, I'd be so grateful if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast player of choice. Your reviews are how other people find this podcast, and it means so much to me to have you share your experience and what this means to you. Stay with me till the end of this episode because I'm going to explain why I think we've been getting the whole healing journey backwards. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Born to Heal podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Deming. And on today's episode, I want to explore the profound difference between eradicating disease and true healing. Well, eliminating disease has its role for sure. Healing is actually what we truly seek. That deep peace that embraces everything, even disease. And true healing transforms our relationship with life itself. And so I want to dive into that today because the other night I received this awareness that I think that we are misguided in what we think the goal of healing is. And so when someone is healing a condition, a disease, an illness, a problem within their body, the focus is really on eradicating that problem, getting rid of that problem so that the body can be healthy again. And absolutely, there is a role for that. That is how I've spent my whole career, right? So I spent 20 years as a radiation oncologist, and then now I've spent almost 2 years as an integrative oncologist using different approaches, but really focused on eradicating disease. And that's what people hire me for. That's what people come to me for. But what I saw the other night was that this is actually not the goal in this lifetime, and that you can eradicate disease and not be healed, and you can heal and not eradicate disease. And so I want to explore what that difference is and why I think that true healing is really the goal as opposed to eradicating disease. And the way that I came to this was really, I've spent so much time around death. I've spent a lot of time. My career in medicine started at hospice. So that's actually the reason why I went into oncology in the first place, is that I was an undergrad. I was studying neuroscience and biopsychology, and I didn't know what I was going to do with that. And I thought that I could either go to medical school or I could do research. And I was, naively thinking those were my two options. Now I realize you could have done anything with an undergraduate degree in neuroscience and biopsychology. But at the time, I was really deciding between these two things. And my mom said, I don't think you want to be a doctor. She was a nurse practitioner, and most of the doctors that she worked with were men. She had worked in the emergency room, and she was like, I don't know that you want that lifestyle. She knew that I wanted children. I always knew that I wanted to have children from a very young age. And she's just like, I don't know that that's conducive to having a family. So in usual fashion, this will make sense to you guys now if you've been listening to me for any time. I basically said, well, what would be the one thing that I would hate about medicine? And that was death, that I had really not had much exposure to death in my lifetime, except for in the fourth grade, one of my friends, her name was Emer Kelleher, she died of leukemia. And I remember that terrified me. I actually thought for the longest time that when people went to Ireland, because she went to Ireland with her family, the summer between first grade and second grade and came back in second grade with leukemia. I thought that people going to Ireland got leukemia. Like I didn't understand this, and then watched her deteriorate. And I remember when I was in the fourth grade, so this was, pretty short before she passed, like a few months before she passed, I had broken my arm or my hand in a running race. And so I couldn't play with the other kids. And so I had to sit out, and she was also sitting out because she wasn't able to play. And I remember thinking, like, I'm going to have this cast on my arm for 6 weeks, but she's never going to get to go back in and play handball. And I was just devastated by that. And I didn't go to her funeral. I had actually switched schools in the fifth grade, and she passed in the fifth grade. And I didn't go because I couldn't handle it. Like it was too much for me to handle at that age. And I always felt regretful that I didn't go to her funeral, but I just couldn't. Like I couldn't at 10 years old. I didn't understand it, and it scared me. And so as I was thinking about a career in medicine, I was like, oh my gosh, I definitely don't want to see people dying. And so I decided that I was going to go volunteer at a hospice because I figured that was the quickest way for me to cross medicine off of my list. And as you guys can tell, this story did not turn out the way that I had planned it. And I volunteered for hospice, and it changed my life. Like being around people who were facing the end of their life was life-changing for me. And the things that I learned about living and about what this life is about was so profound that I decided, after that short experience working in hospice, I probably was there for a year or so. I was like, I want to be around this always. These are the people that I want to be around. And so at that particular hospice, there were mostly people with cancer. There were also people with AIDS at that time in this particular hospice. But I decided that I wanted to not only go to medical school, but that I wanted to become an oncologist so that I could be close to that wisdom and truth that is present as people near the end of their life. And so I spent that time leading into, my medical career. And then as an oncologist, have spent a lot of time around people at the end of life and really love that intimacy of being close to people as they're reflecting on their life. And then also I'm not afraid of it. Like for whatever reason, I was very afraid of death when I was a child because of that experience with my friend. But after the experience at hospice, I was like, I'm not afraid to be with these people. And I knew a lot of other doctors, a lot of other healthcare professionals were like, ooh, I don't think I can handle that being so close to death. And so for me, I always loved being with my patients and really walking with them as they got close to the end of life, because it just felt comfortable for me. And there was so much wisdom, and I knew that they needed someone to be there. And if I felt comfortable, then that to me was like a beautiful thing that I could offer in terms of my service. And so I intentionally spent a lot of time close to my patients who were reflecting on their life. And I'll tell you that those ones that had their cancer, that they died of their cancer, weren't talking about their cancer as they transitioned. The things that they regretted were consistent, whether they died of their cancer or whether they had been healed of their cancer and were dying of something else. And the consistent regret that I heard, the number one thing that I heard from my patients was that I wish I had been true to myself. I wish I had been authentic and hadn't done what everyone else wanted me to do. And so that was the same. So curing your cancer actually didn't change that regret. People had that regret regardless of whether they had cancer or whether they didn't have cancer. And then on the flip side of that, my patients that died of their cancer who had lived a life that was authentic to themselves, and specifically, I remember this one patient. Her name was Patsy, and she was the only person in my career that I helped transition using medical aid in dying. And this is basically where patients who have a terminal illness can request medications to end their life on their terms. And you have to meet specific criteria. It's a long process. There's all of these checks and balances to make sure that this process is not abused. And I ended up helping Patsy transition in 2019. And Patsy was someone who knew. I actually need to do a whole episode on this. We did a beautiful interview with her daughter and myself on another podcast, but unfortunately the whole, all of those tapes or records have been lost. But maybe I'll invite Christina and we can have a conversation about this on my podcast. It was beautiful. That was the most beautiful transition I've ever been a part of. But it was all because of Patsy. Patsy was so clear. She had lived her life so fearlessly with so much courage. She was this, I don't know, she was probably like 4'10". She looked tiny next to me and I'm 5'1". So she was this little tiny woman. She had like beautiful, beautiful white hair and these piercing blue eyes when I met her. And she was basically dying of esophageal cancer when I met her. But she had lived her life exactly the way that she wanted to. Of course, like everything didn't turn out the way that she wanted to, but she had been fiercely independent and authentic to who she was and didn't care, didn't give a rip what anyone else thought, and was going to do things her own way. And so she ended her life in the same way with that same tenacity and same clarity. And she literally was the only person who I have seen just completely at peace with how she had lived her life and where she was going and what was next. And not to say that my other patients didn't have some sense of peace, but this was such a clear demonstration. Like she was the one that I was like, at the end of my life, I want to be like Patsy. Like she was a model for me because I had seen so many people regretful of how they had lived their life. And Patsy died of her cancer. And I've had other patients who have died of their cancer as well, who maybe didn't have the same level of peace that Patsy did, but not one of them, if they had lived their life in a way that felt in alignment with themselves, none of them talked about the cancer. None of them talked about regretting that they were dying of cancer and that making it all about the cancer and that they would wish they had eradicated the disease. They were focused on how they had lived. And so the other night when I was thinking about this, I was like, I honestly think this is really like what I think. I think we have it all backwards. I think that eradicating disease is not the goal at all. Because if you eradicate your disease, and you get to the end of your life and you are regretful of how you lived your life, you haven't healed. You haven't come here to do what you came here to do. And this is my biggest fear, right? The whole reason why I ultimately blew up my life and left Western medicine and got a divorce and all of that was because I knew when I heard that message that you need to leave, and I had the shared death experience where it became clear, I knew that if I didn't do that, if I didn't follow that information and do what I know my soul was calling me to do, that I would regret it. at the end of my life. And I knew that I could not do that. I knew that that was more important than anything else. And so I say this to you because are you focused on eradicating disease, but in fear and not living the life that is true to who you are? And if so, what needs to happen for you to get that healing, to get that peace, to get that clarity? Because I'll tell you that if you can find peace and healing in the illness, then when you leave here, you're not going to have that regret. And you're going to reflect on your life in a way that you did what you came here to do. And I think all of us have this sense inside, this like little feeling like, I know I'm here to do something. I just don't know what it is. And I'll tell you that this is universal. Like, thousands of patients that I've seen, everyone feels like we're here for a reason, that there's a reason why we came here. And most people don't realize it until they leave, that the reason why they're here is to come and be themselves, to be an authentic, individual, unique person. That's it. It's so simple that it's actually like we totally miss it. But that's why we're here. We're here to express our uniqueness and be that N of one. And yet we spend our lives trying to fit in, trying to make other people happy, taking care of everyone else, doing all of the things that we're told you are going to make us happy. And most of us are not. Most of us don't find happiness in being someone that we're not. What we find is we feel misaligned and we feel like we're missing something. And so my goal for my own life, but also my wish for you, is that we let go of that. And we realize that the illness is actually showing us something. And a lot of the time, what an illness is showing you is where you're misaligned. And it may not be clear. The illness may not be like a direct result where you're like, okay, this type of cancer means this. And I know there are frameworks for that. German New Medicine is an example of how, it can show that there's certain conflicts tied to certain types of illness. And, also there are lots of books that talk about, cancer being related to anger or whatever it is. And there's so many that actually, I'm not sure what is correct because there's so many different interpretations, but I do know this: your illness is trying to tell you something. And usually something is out of alignment in your life. And I talked about this on the intuition episode, but your job is to start being authentic to you. And that often is not an easy process because we are born into a society, a world where we are conditioned from the day we are born into becoming something, right? And it depends on your family, it depends on your religion, depends on your government, all of that stuff. But basically, we are shaped into becoming something. And a lot of that shaping happens in the first 7 years of life when the subconscious mind is basically like a tape recorder and it records everything that we experience, not making, right or wrong or good or bad out of anything. It just records everything. And then that tape is played back for the rest of our life. Unless you do work on reprogramming your subconscious, most of us have been conditioned and trained into becoming someone that we are not. And that is what you're here to do. I'm telling you, if there's one thing that you can do before the end of your life, is to dismantle who you've become through conditioning and tap into who you really are and who you came here to be. And I don't care if you die of cancer, if you don't die of cancer. If you do that, you will find peace. And the idea that I will just be happy. My life can go on when the cancer's gone. Like everything is contingent on when that happens. This is what I'm going to have. I'll tell you that that's not true because I've seen so many people that they heal their cancer and then they have the same problems. They get rid of their cancer, do conventional treatment, go back to their regular life. And that's frankly one of the reasons why I knew I had to leave. Like that's one of the things that I saw. It was like, I had this one patient, and this was when I started to realize, like, okay, I was having the messages that I was supposed to leave Western medicine. I didn't understand it. I couldn't grasp it, but I knew that whatever we were doing in Western medicine wasn't true healing. And I remember that I had started teaching my patients about self-love and, this connecting with themselves and learning how to be authentic to themselves and how to care for themselves and how to create boundaries. And so it was interesting because my patients really weren't there for that from me. I was like, I think I need to do something different because they're not here to hear. That's not what they want to hear from me because they just want me to give radiation and like be, let them go on their way. But I had this one patient who was very open to the things that I was teaching her because I see my patients every week when they're having radiation. And so we had done all this work on boundaries and taking care of herself and nourishing herself and, starting to exercise. She had 2 small children and she basically had not been taking care of herself. And so while she was doing radiation, she, wasn't working and she was, had more help at home and was able to take care of herself better. And I remember when she came back to me at 6 weeks for her 6-week follow-up after radiation, and I asked her, how all of those things were going. And she was like, oh, Dr. Deming, after the treatment, everyone had been like, taking care of everything for so long during chemo and during the surgery and now radiation. And so I just jumped back in and I had to take care of everything. So now I'm actually doing more than I was doing before. So I haven't been doing any of those things that we talked about. And my heart sunk because I was like, gosh, she just missed a huge opportunity to change her life and start taking care of herself and start paying attention to what was important to her. And so I think that you can do all the treatments and you can even do some of the stuff of taking care of yourself, like getting the messages that the things that need to shift while you're healing cancer. But if you don't embrace this as a life change, you're just going to go back and get swallowed up by life because it basically will just turn you back out. Life right now is stressful in our modern world and it's so toxic on so many levels. And I've talked about that on all my episodes and the different toxicities and the things that we're exposed to. But if you go back and then you're just back in that toxic soup and you're not paying attention to like, who am I? What do I need? What does my body need? What does my soul need? Like, why am I here? If you don't ponder those questions, you will at the end of your life. I promise you. I've seen so many people there that you are not going to care about whether your cancer was eradicated at that time if you haven't done this other work. So I'm not, and I want to be clear here. I'm not saying that eradicating cancer is not a good thing. Like, absolutely. Of course, we all want that. I want that for you. I want everyone to be healthy. I want to help us detoxify our bodies and our minds and our emotions. And I want to help people nourish so that they don't get sick in the first place. And then if you have cancer, that you heal it. That's like, I want that for you. But I'm telling you that this is more important than that. That even if you do that, if you don't live according to who you are and you're living someone else's life, you'll regret it at the end of your life. And we only get this one life, this one time around. Obviously, I believe that we come back and that we do this over and over again. But each time that we come in, each incarnation is an opportunity And you're here for a reason. You're here to be your unique self and put that energy into the world and make a unique mark on the world. And it doesn't have to be a big mark. It can be, just in your small corner. But that's why you're here. And if we don't do that, we've missed the whole reason. And I've just seen too many people really, really sad at the end of their life. And that's part of the reason why I loved being at hospice when I was 20 years old, because I wasn't thinking about any of that, right? At 20 years old, you think the world revolves around you. I was doing all kinds of things and pushing achievement. I was, had been a professional triathlete at that point, and I was, planning to go to medical school. And I just was like so full of ambition. And I thought that that's what this life was about. And honestly, I pursued that for a very long time, right? This like achievement orientation. But I started to hear the truth at that hospice when I was 20 years old. And then I wanted to be close to that. And that's, that was my intuition saying there is truth here. There is wisdom here. And that I was pulled to really be close to people who are facing their own mortality. And I didn't get it. It took me a long time to get it, right? I was like caught up in the, the doing, the achieving. I did all of that for so long. And then, when I had my shared death experience, it really showed me like, oh, I'm doing this, but this is not actually who I am. And so my decision to leave Western medicine, even though I didn't know who I was, I knew that who I had become was not who I was meant to be and what I was here to do. And so I had to let that go. And that was painful. And that was like the hardest thing that I've ever done. But the thing that I have now is now I have authenticity. And even now I'm starting to realize like I've taken on conditioning now in my new practice that is not necessarily me, right? Because I went from one structure of being a radiation oncologist into this space. And then what do you call someone who, helps people get better results with conventional therapy and then also does natural therapy? That's an integrative oncologist, right? So now I'm an integrative oncologist, and I've almost like I left one cage and then created a new cage for myself. And actually, I heard that from one of my clients recently who was fasting and was talking about that she had left her corporate job that was one cage and then had created a business that was a new cage. And this cage for me is like more aligned with who I am, but still I'm seeing, oh, there's actually more for me to shed. There's more for me to step into being the most authentic version of myself and serving at the highest level, because the more authentic I can be, the more I can give and the more I can share of my unique gifts, talents, and light in the world. And so I'm learning this right along with you, but I may be one step ahead because I've already had to make some of those shifts to align more with my authentic self. So that's the first thing, is like this authenticity and really stepping into who you are is why you're here. And that's part of true healing. But the other piece is the peace. So the other piece of this is peace, meaning finding the serenity, the peace in regardless of what is happening. Like whether you have cancer that is not controlled, whether you have another illness that is not controlled, whether you're dealing with whatever, catastrophic event in your life, can you find peace? We are here to experience the human experience, which is one of contrast. I think we've been sold, this is another part of the conditioning. We've been sold a story that you came here so that you could go to school, get married, have 2 children, live the perfect life and happily ever after. And I mean, look around. How many people is that working out for? That's not why we're here. That's a story. That's a conditioning that's been sold to you. And now people feel unhappy. They feel like I haven't achieved it, like they've failed. But the truth is, that's not what this is about anyway. This is a place where we come to learn lessons. This is a place of contrast. And so the goal is not to make the perfect life, because I'm just going to tell you that's never going to happen, because everything that swings one way is going to swing back the other way, right? So every kingdom has its rise and its fall. Same thing happens in our lives. And so finding peace, regardless of where you're at in your journey, whether things are going amazing or whether things are really looking pretty terrible, if you can find peace, that's the secret. Then you can manage through anything. And then you're not fighting, you're not resisting. Because how much resistance do you feel around healing? Like, why does this feel so hard? Why does it feel like I'm constantly coming up against these walls? A lot of it is the internal resistance of your idea of what is supposed to happen. And I don't know, like, this is the thing too, is that I don't know whether your cancer is supposed to go away. And I say that with all due respect. I'm not saying that I don't want that for you. I want that for everyone. But what if it's not? What if it's not your path? What if your path is having cancer? Finding peace in that is your freedom. That's like where you get your wings so you can be free, is when you find peace in the shittiest, excuse my language, experience. When things are bad, if you can find peace there, that's your key to happiness. Happiness is not a destination. Don Javier often says, there is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way. And that is so true. You can find happiness in everything, in every moment, in every experience. And I know that a lot of you will say, well, you just don't know what I've been dealt in my life and the trauma that I've experienced. And I don't know what you've been through. But I know personally that, and this is part of why I think that my practice, and specifically dealing with all of the emotional trauma related to illness, is so close to my heart, is because I've had a lot of trauma in my life. So I understand bad things happen. And what are you going to do with it? Are you going to stay there? Are you going to, allow that to define the rest of your life? And personally, I choose not to do that. Like, I'm choosing peace in the moment. And as I've gone through the past few years of leaving Western medicine, getting a divorce, starting over, all of that stuff, there's been a lot of days where I'm like, wow, this is like really hard. But holding that peace inside myself, just like, okay, trusting, as long as I stay aligned with myself and I'm following my intuition and I'm following what I'm guided to do, I'm on the right path. And so that's my wish for you. My wish for you. And this part makes me emotional because this is why we're here. My wish for you is that you find your peace and that you can hold that no matter what happens. Because I promise you that if you can find that, healing, eradication of disease follows. Think of Anita Moorjani. So Anita Moorjani, if you've never read this book, she wrote a book called Dying to Be Me, and she had lymphoma. She actually ended up having a near-death experience. Her body was full of tumors, and she ended up dying of organ failure and had a near-death experience and then came back. And when she had left her body, when she had the near-death experience, she saw who she was. She saw that she wasn't this body. She saw that everything was fine. She also saw her dad, and she had had like a really challenging relationship with her dad, and she thought that her dad didn't love her. And her dad showed her how much he loved her, just beyond what she could have ever imagined. And when she came back in, she hadn't had any different treatments at that point. She came back in and she knew that everything was fine. She was at total peace. And then what happened? all of those tumors melted away. That is possible for everyone. But I think we've got it backwards. We're so focused on eradicating disease, and then we think the healing happens because we've done that. I would argue that it's the reverse. If we can heal and we can come to peace and we can become more authentic to ourselves, then the eradication disease follows that. I hope this has been helpful for you. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on the next episode. And take care. Thank you for being here today. Please enjoy a previous episode of Born to Heal. And if you found value in our conversation, please subscribe and share with someone who might benefit. Have questions? Drop them in the YouTube comments or message me on Instagram. Links are in the episode description. And remember, just like me, you were born to heal.